Hello, welcome to the Yoga Well podcast. My name is Jess Demshar, and I am the Offerings and Business Director here at the Yoga Well Institute. And I am here today to introduce a special podcast that we are hosting on our platform, which is actually an episode from Robyn Love's YouTube channel and a show she hosts there called Small Things Brought Together, in which Robyn recently invited me on to talk about all things yoga and creativity and arts and other things. We get into a lot. Her show is a little longer format, which really allowed us to dive into things that we are both very passionate about. Robyn teaches our yoga and creativity course here on this platform. And we talk a lot about how she developed this course, why she developed this course, and all the things you may be wondering about how yoga and creativity complement, link, and benefit one another. So we hope you'll enjoy this. To learn more about Robyn and her art, or the show Small Things Brought Together, be sure to check out our show notes. And if you're at all interested in the offering she teaches here, yoga and creativity, know that it is something we offer a few times a year. And at the time of this recording, her next cohort begins October 20th, 2024. So be sure to check out the Yoga Well website for when that class is being offered or to enroll in our upcoming cohort. We hope that you'll enjoy this and find something creative to do today. Take care.
Hello and welcome to Small Things Brought Together. And this is a special bonus episode, which is being offered in collaboration with the Yoga Well Institute podcast. And I am delighted that it brings me together today with Jess Demshar, who is the Offerings Director. We'll clarify this.
Yeah, chunky little title, Offerings and Business Director. Yep.
And business at Yoga Well. So just by way of a quick introduction, Small Things Brought Together is an ongoing series of conversations with artists and others about the creative process. Now in its sixth season, Small Things Brought Together is a long format conversation. So we have time to really dig in, circle back, sit in silence, and get beyond the sound bites of what is the creative process. And as we've discovered over our 6 seasons, it's not one thing. And it's in that spirit that we are having this episode with Yoga Well Institute. Just because many people who may be familiar with Small Things Brought Together may not know that in addition to being an artist, I am a yoga therapist and have led, in particular, amongst other things in that realm, led a class called Yoga and Creativity. First with my own yoga school called Hatha Yoga, and then happily with Yoga Well Institute. And so welcome, Jess. Thank you so much for being here and collaborating on this today. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to dive into this and, hopefully shed some light on why we wanted this class at the Yoga Well Institute, why it's important, where the overlap is, and just all the nitty gritty of how yoga, creativity, so many things are actually one and the same. We just don't tend to think of them that way.
Yeah. And, maybe before you give a little more introduction of yourself, I just want to say that for this episode, it's coming immediately after the first episode of the 6th season, which I did a conversation with Jody Hojin Kimmel Sensei, a rare twin spin episode. Hojin Sensei is the abbot at Fire Lotus Temple, which is the Zen center of New York City. She's also a working artist. And she really has been a huge influence on my own art, but in particular, how art can be a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to have this conversation on the heels of that one, because I think we're going to see a lot of overlap. So again, welcome, Jess, and maybe will you
Mhm.
share a little bit about yourself and your
Yeah,
artistic background, your yogic background?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm the Offerings and Business Director at the Yoga Institute, and the Yoga Institute is a Vinny Yoga lineage based institute headed by Chase Bossart, who was a longtime student of Mr. TKV Desikachar, who is the son of Krishnamacharya. So there's a lineage aspect to what we do. And then, Robyn, you were one of Chase's students. So it's like Krishnamacharya, Mr. Desikachar, Chase, Robyn. Like that's the beauty of lineage, right? Like it's wonderful. Um, but before that, I've had a lot of different. I've worn many different hats. I am an artist. I started actually when I graduated high school. I did go to art school. I dropped out, um,
I
like
think that's
many
a good
do.
thing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was gonna say like many do. There's a lot of argument for doing that. And But then circuitously kind of got involved in some other things. I ended up getting a degree in politics, culture, and social movement. Did a lot of work in immigrants' rights, activism sort of things, was actually on the path to go to law school. And my local yoga studio was like, you should do yoga teacher training, as we've all heard. And, that phrase, that invitation before, and I took it. And it was back in 2009 when yoga just sort of exploded in the Western world. Like what we know, it is the impetus of yoga as we know it today was happening, 2006 to probably 2015, I think were those incubation years. And so unbeknownst to me, in doing that, I set myself off on a yoga career. I mean, just the simple fact that it was exploding like it did, um, and I entered into that world when I did. There was just every opportunity available for that, and so I ended up not going to law school. But in the background, I've always been involved in creative projects. I've made films. I've had films on the film festival circuit as a producer. Um, work with a number. I've always sort of it's interesting. My professional life was always yoga, but my personal life was always creative. So even if I wasn't creating myself, all of my friends, big practicing artists. I have a very dear friend who's a pretty in his own way, well-known street and earth artist, and we drove from Denver to Guatemala creating installation pieces for a number of months. Um, and so it's always sort of been this thing that, especially, I've attached myself to others with, or like helped others, but I have admittedly struggled with um, my own practice, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about the struggles as we further and go deeper into this. And but I, by another circuitous route, ended up here at the Yoga Institute, where I've been about 4 years now. And it was at a time when I swore I was never going to work in yoga again.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah, it is. But I kind of came in as just a little, honestly, I mean, it was the pandemic, a layoff in my previous life, and needing to find something, and coming into the yoga wall is kind of a bit of almost like I mean, I don't want to sound self-deprecating, but kind of like a peon role of like, oh, you're just going to do some admin work. And, now I'm running the company. So, it's a pattern in my life. But in that, that's how you and I got introduced. And you offered the yoga and creativity course on your platform. And I took it, and it was like, more people need to do this. Because I took it at a time when it was like, hey, it's too long of a story to get into all of everything, but I've made a lot of life choices in the past. I mean, the pandemic sort of puts a weird thing on timelines. Like,
Yes.
I want to say 4 years, but it's really 8. Because a lot happened in my life when the pandemic hit, as it did for everyone. But I had really been making conscious choices to move into this space of a more creative life, whether in work or in general. But recognizing that I have some struggles there, and your class came in at a time like that, and it was like, oh, right, we should be doing, like, this is such a natural marriage, yoga and creativity. And we'll be offering it for a third time on the Yoga Well platform coming up in October, which is very exciting. But one of the things, everyone that takes it is just like mind blown. Why aren't people doing, like, it's to my knowledge today, it is still the only type of offering like it. I mean, maybe there are others, but again, to my knowledge, I don't know of any others. And I yeah, it was just like, more people need to do this. I wish more people could understand how these things complement each other, just like spirituality, just like, like, and so, yeah, one of the things we had talked about is like, hey, let's talk about it in this sort of platform, and hash it out in a way that, a marketing email or a Instagram post or any of those sort of things just don't capture.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think well, I'm super interested, and maybe will be another conversation for us to have, but I was actually just talking to someone yesterday about doing social activist work as a spiritual
Mm-hmm.
practice, as a creative practice. So it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that you have all three of those threads running through you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, super interesting. But I think, just like yoga has a lot of misunderstanding about like who can and can't do yoga, are you supposed
Mm-hmm.
to be young and white and female and bendy,
Mm-hmm.
or it's creativity also has a lot of these, yeah, just goal, like barriers people put up
Mm-hmm.
barriers thinking,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm not creative. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I heard someone say that.
I didn't read the article, and we're not going to go down an AI rabbit hole because I could go off. But I saw a headline for an article of something about how, hey, AI is opening up the world of creativity to everyone. And it was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is an innate thing, right? This is something that, like,
Yeah.
And what we're really talking about is a state. It's like, no, this idea that it's compartmentalized to a body of work, to a time, to a studio space, to any of these things is so, it's such a big misconception. And like, um
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, we'll kind of dive into it more, but the idea
Yeah.
that, AI is allowing people to be
Yeah,
creative, it's like, no, like,
yeah, and I think just like, when I think about yoga as a way of just being alive as a human being,
mm,
making the most of this experience.
mm,
I think creativity is same. I have two children, and watching them, go from newborns to now adults, and seeing the way that they are, that like, and I'm just using them as the example because that's the most close intimate example I have had in my life of watching that process. But I know it's universal really, as we come into the world so curious and like sponges, just
mm,
wanting to learn, like that impulse to understand our world. And
mm,
I know as a mother, it became my sort of goal to
mm,
never yeah, to sort of try to keep the fewest hindrances that would interfere with that innate curiosity. And so that's why I truly believe that every single person is a creative being, because
mm,
we're all, that's how we enter the world. Yeah.
mm. Absolutely. Um, yeah, yeah. You just said it so perfectly. I want to leave it there because, no, like everything, there's barriers. I mean, even, and the argument can be made that, hey, we enter into the world in a state of yoga, in a state of balance, and it's everything else. that throws us off. And then we get this idea that somehow like we exist out of balance and that's the norm.
Yeah.
But really it's like, no, like this, yoga is a way, just like creativity is a way of expressing humanness
Yeah.
and the human condition and the human experience. And like, we're all in it, whether we realize it or not. And I say that like kind of like a joke, but no, I mean like how like that's the mindlessness of going through your day to day, of waking up and doing the same thing, going to bed, and just routine, pattern, whatever word you want to use for it. But when it's like, hey, no, like none of that is actually your natural state. Like it's not your natural state to be disengaged. You talk about yoga being curious, whereas or I'm sorry, creativity being about curiosity, and that you come into this world curious. You come into this world ready to engage with it, and it's only all the other things that come at you that shut you off from those experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this way, I think, you know, I think, well, you had said earlier before we started recording, talking about like, what is yoga? Yoga is a state of being, a state of mind. But, when I say the word mind, I don't mean just the intellectual mind, it's in yoga, we have many words for mind. And so it's a bigger, more all-encompassing term, mind. And yeah, but also physical state, also state of our breath, is a big piece of a practice, especially in Vini yoga. And when I think about, one of the things that yoga has offered me is, I started as an artist, sort of like you, got, lured into a teacher training. And, really seeing like, oh, there's words to put to all these experiences that I had had as an artist. And in my creative life, suddenly there was a vocabulary to talk about what was happening. So in some ways, yoga helped me understand creativity rather than the other way around. And what I've in fact, Small Things Brought Together, having like all these conversations with artists, most of whom have never thought about yoga philosophy ever. And they'll be talking about their process, and in my mind I'm like, oh, and I'm giving it words, yoga words, vairagyam, shraddha, abhyasa, all these words that we use in yoga to talk about what is yoga, how do you practice yoga, how do you live a life of yoga. And
Right.
I just see artists doing it minus the vocabulary, but they're doing it.
Right. Yeah. And especially when you're talking about, I think that there's an important distinction to be made here of like, okay, what is yoga? Like perhaps you're talking to an audience. It's like yoga is that thing that happens at my rec center. It happens in the studio. There's classes I can go with goats. Like all of these things
Beer.
out there. Yeah. Beer there, I mean, I was living in Denver for 20 years and, there's a lot of like blaze and bow, they're like cannabis related yoga now and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, that is, I need to make the distinction that is so far from the yoga that we do at the Yoga Well Institute. And in fact, at the Yoga Well Institute, one of the things we talk about constantly is that the hardest thing about getting our message and the good work that we do out into the world is that we have to use the word yoga because it comes with all of these different connotations, where when we really look at what we are much more of a spiritual and personal transformation center that uses yoga as its modality, specifically more than anything yoga philosophy. So within that, it opens up what yoga is to a whole lot of possibilities. And, we primarily practice in a way that is with a personal teacher or mentor, as we refer to them at the Yoga Well Institute. You know, you are a personal teacher and mentor to many. That's a yoga therapist is another word for that. The more sort of Western professional word. But you know, in that relationship, what you're doing is you're navigating life first and foremost through yoga philosophy and sacred text and ideas and concepts. And then there are things like the breath, the meditation, and the asana, and all of these tools that help you contextualize the philosophy.
Yeah.
So when, you know, in talking about like yoga and creativity, especially, um, we're really talking about like these ideas, these concepts, not like, hey, you know, and I'm not saying this doesn't work. I'm a big believer that everything works for somebody and
Yeah.
there's something for everyone out there. You know, I don't believe, and in fact, it's a philosophy we have at the Yoga Well that we're not in competition with anyone, because we're only going to help the people that are looking for us, that we're right for. Like, I can't force what we do um, onto anyone. You know,
Right.
if anything, what we're trying to do is just making sure that the people looking for us find us.
Yeah.
But you know, so it may be really helpful to some people to go, that they've got a weekly class or a teacher that they like at their rec center, and they go and they do asana and they come out and their state has changed, and like that is a sufficient space. Um, but what we're really talking about is like, how do we take all of these tools of yoga to set an intention to direct our state? And that's the
Yeah.
yoga and creativity, because in many ways, if you look at yoga as a philosophical practice, um, with different tools that include breath and meditation and asana, what you're actually looking at is a lifestyle, or it's all encompassing and all the time.
Yeah.
Just like, you know, if you have a in-depth spiritual practice, like there are ways in which that permeates everything in your life. It is not just the Sundays you go to church or the days you
Right.
go to temple. It's a integral part of who you are and something that you practice. And then yoga is the same way if you choose to approach the practice in that way. And then you take that the next step, or the logical sort of, I don't know. I mean, they're all the same point. It's just whether we're using yoga, creativity, or spirituality. Like, creativity is a state you exist in. And one of the things that we do in the West is we compartmentalize everything. So people think creativity is then, oh, creativity is when I'm like sitting at my typewriter writing my novel, writing the next great American or Canadian novel, whichever it is, you know,
Right.
like, and it's like, well, you know, if that is your identity, which is something that, you know, we talk about in yoga all the time, like if your identity is writer and you are deeply attached to that identity, and for whatever reason you're experiencing a writer's block, well, then that's when the dominoes fall, right? That like all of those things about your state, like, well, you can't get into a creative state if it's not writing. You aren't, you know, all of these things if it's not happening in this capacity, because you're so attached to that identity. But if you say, hey, actually, I want to set an intention to live in a creative state. My preferred medium is writing, yeah. But if my state is that of creativity, well, then maybe writing's not really coming right now, but there's a cooking class being offered at a restaurant that I really love. I'm going to take that cooking class, and I'm going to do these other things, like whatever you're exercising, right? Because it's, I think you had mentioned in our sort of warm up conversation, you know, it's when you view these things as state, they're always working, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah.
So that inspiration to add, you know, cumin or coriander to a recipe that you usually make, like, that didn't come out of nowhere. You didn't like clap your hands and say, go creativity on, and then, you know, spice up your own recipe. my husband has his master's in poetry from the Naropa Institute. He was Anne Waldman's assistant for a number of years and studied under all those beat poets. And he had a mentor that always told him that emphasized that all of his students like have a practice that they're not good at. Right? Like if your medium is poetry, like go out and take a painting class.
Yes.
And like, you know, like constantly be doing things in that vein so that when the time to shine is there, you're opening it, but you're also challenging yourself and having to think and you know, shifting into a different form of state of like, hey, you know, like I'm currently in a ceramics class and I'm probably never going to be really good at ceramics unless I spend the 10 grand to make a home studio, which is not happening anytime soon. But just having that space, just knowing that time, it you know, it's like, it's not my preferred medium. It's not my favorite thing. I don't recommend ceramics for the faint of heart. There's, as we always joke in class, like there are 1,000 ways something can go wrong. And just, you know, towards, this is my teacher's finished piece, but like, you know, along the way, there's 1,000 ways that this could have broken or not been in existence. So it's not for the faint of heart, but it's a great practice. And it's just a different avenue. And it's that state. It's that constantly chasing that state. Just like perhaps in your yoga practice with your mentor or your God, you know, in the Vinaya yoga tradition, you do work with someone outside of yourself. It is not something you can self-direct.
Yeah.
And there's very, maybe you can speak to that more, but it's very intentional that someone outside of you has the insight in that you can't see for yourself. And I think that's true in creativity as well. I think I'm a huge believer in people telling you need to step up in your life. And I think creatively, you should always be finding groups of people who are willing to say, hey, I think you can, you know, like you can grow, try this, push. It doesn't, I mean, not cruelly, but I live outside of Santa Fe, and so I'm very surrounded by all kinds of art. And it's very clear to me that there are a lot of people that do not get feedback.
Well, you know, one thing I've learned a lot. So, you know, like you, I went to art school. I think you said that. Yeah. And I didn't drop out. I hung in there. But,
congratulations.
I wanted to by the end, but I but you know, but one thing that I got taught in that art school setting, which I think is a reason that people are scared of doing something creative and sharing it, is it was like a kind of harsh critiques. You know, if you weren't crying by the end of the critique where you really critiqued, right? That was the attitude then. I don't know how it is now. But one thing I learned in working with Hojin Sensei, I'll bring her name up again, is she actually calls it creative process or something, but it's a way of looking at other people's work that is not about a judgment of good or bad. It's really a way of like there's a whole process, just like we might have a process in our yoga practice of entering in to, like, you sit first and you're quiet. Then you look, the person shares, whether they read a poem or they hold up their artwork or it's pinned on the wall or whatever. And you just silently, as a group, look at it. And then it's like, the only things that's shared is like, what do you feel in your body? Oh, that actually made my chest like contract, or I felt tension in my shoulders, or an emotion arose in me that was this or that. And so the person gets feedback about what's going on, but it's not framed in this kind of good, bad, success, failure kind of way. And my experience of that, being a part of that, being a recipient of that, and observing others, you know, being the recipient of that, is that it's such an invitation because it takes that harsh piece out, and it really just looks at everything on its own terms. And to me, it sort of gives people the courage to step forward even more, because I think what holds us back is fear. Like somewhere in our past, somebody, usually a person of authority, criticized our work. Was your kindergarten teacher, or I mean, some brutal critiques of my work,
Oh yeah, I mean, I grew up in Wyoming, and it was like the attitude was like, if you're not, if you can't be literally the world's next greatest artist, like, what is the point? And
What
I've
does that
struggled
mean?
against that my whole life, like, and that will creep in because it's like, oh, who cares if I'm going to do this? And so much of what you're saying about this creative process critique model, I mean, that's yoga therapy. That
Yeah.
is mentorship. That's one-on-one. Like, your yoga therapist, your mentor, your personal teacher, they're not looking at you and being like, God, you really suck.
You're fucked.
Yeah. I mean, Robyn, I could get salty. I don't want to. I mean, I'm reining it in because this feels like a gentle podcast. But I could, the salty language is one of my specialties. But no, but it's like, no, your yoga therapist is like, well, what happened? How did that make you feel? Do we want to change that feeling? Do we want to shift that? And when I say people in the creative world should have some sort of feedback loop, that is what I mean. I don't think harsh criticism. I believe everyone should do all of these things all the time. I think it's open to everyone. But I also think that you are doing yourself a disservice if you don't seek out a community support system that will give you that, and of peers.
Yeah.
This is one thing that I think art school is good for, is that you can establish a peer network, or something along those lines. Because while I dropped out of art school, I think I used more of what I learned in art school on a regular basis than the degree that I got, than like all these other professional things, because it's not, people think, especially in a world where everything has been made, AI is allowing people to be creative, digital imagery. I mean, I started art school at the time when, like, those worlds were really blending, and it was like there was a stark contrast between the people who could do the thing by hand and the people who could do the thing with commands. And I admit that I personally have a little bit of, like, animosity might be too strong of a word, but I'm not a huge fan of digital illustration as a practice, if it's your sole practice, because the fact that you can erase your mistakes as they happen, like, you're not actually flexing certain creative muscles in your brain. Just like with photography, like, it was years before I switched off of film to digital photography, because if you don't learn how to shoot on film, that's why you have 100 pictures of the same flower. Of course you're going to get a good one.
Right.
But when you were shooting on film, you had to be really conscious, because if you had a roll of 24, frames, you may get, if you got 16 good pictures out of that, that was huge.
Right.
And it's about training what you see, like how you go out in the world and see things, just like working through your mistakes.
Yeah.
Is how you start to create, like, because the thing is, it's like most creativity, most finished products that come out of a creative process, whatever it is, they're the result of the process. And if you think that, like, if you see a painting, like, none of this work behind me is mine. These are thrift store finds and different things. But, like, there's some portraits there, and it's like, that's not the, for most people, there are certain artists that have a ability to see and put down, but these things didn't have they're the end product of the process. It's not like an artist is like, hey, I saw this vision and I put it exactly down on the paper, exactly like it was in my head.
If I may.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even probably whatever's behind you is just like a part of a continuum of process. And when I originally conceived of this class, it was really like seeing very clearly this relationship between the what the Yoga Sutra said about the how to do yoga
Mm-hmm.
and how I do art making, and realizing they're identical. And a big piece of that is like, oh, there's no such thing as a mistake because it's all
Right.
part of the process. And
Yes.
there's an artist who I believe lived in New Mexico or Arizona at the end of her life, Agnes Martin.
Okay.
And she actually talks about, there's a wonderful film, she's now passed, but about her at near the end of her life, and she's living in a retirement community. I thought it was in New Mexico. But she basically she has a studio. It's very plain, and she makes these paintings. But she's basically, to hear her talk about it, you're hearing her talk about a yoga process where she would sit and get quiet. And she talks about having to unlearn everything she ever learned. So she doesn't believe her thoughts, basically. And then she waits, and a little image of the painting she's going to do appears to her. But she sits patiently and waits. And then her job, her role, is to then carry out doing it. But of course, in the carrying out, I mean, hearing her talk about it, I highly recommend people seek out her film. I think you can find it on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
But like, just hearing her talk about this process, which, it is like she waits for, we talk about tune in, listen, and follow in yoga. We do yoga, we get into that state so that we can hear and we can receive, what to do. Basically, like the voice that's speaking to us, we often say, is very quiet, and it's different from all the other voices competing for our attention in our mind. And when she talks about this, it's really is, that's what she's doing. She's waiting for that quiet voice to come and tell her what her next painting is.
Yeah. The knowing, as we
Super
might call it. And
interesting.
yeah, it is. And I want to clarify that, like,
Yeah.
mistakes aren't, in my mind, bad. They're just things that, the things that we have to work around. Like when the line doesn't go exactly the way you wanted it to, or, and this is like, if we put it back in a yoga process, like I snapped at my husband this morning, didn't want to do that. Now, in a digital world where I could erase that, then I don't have to change. Right.
Right.
And this is what I'm saying about, like, I don't have to, like, you have to be very careful about things being too easy. Like, pretty images are a dime a dozen these days. And in fact, even if you look at, I do a lot of creative directing at Yoga Well as well. And like, we use a lot of stock images, and, we try not to attach our things to, we don't use images of people in yoga pants doing things because that's not who we are. And so, but there's like when I select images for certain things, I don't really do our Instagram, but I do a lot of our marketing stuff. It's like, I'm trying to evoke something. Yeah, these are stock images. And I mean, I could pick a pretty flower in like 2 minutes flat. Like if I really, I could pick an image that is absolutely true.
Yeah.
But if I want to evoke something, I need to take some time, and it might take me 20 minutes to find the image that we're going to use, or 2 hours. Like I've spent days looking for images for certain things where I'm like, it's not capturing, because those are all subtle things. So like, it's this idea that like, hey, anybody can take a pretty picture these days. Anybody, like, yeah, like there are so many ways that all this technology is opening up the world to making pretty or palatable things. But what's underneath that, just like in your real life, like if I snap at my husband, there's not a little like undo button that I can tap, in which I don't have to change. Like, right. I don't have to like work on myself. I can just be like, oh, go back. And I'm going to redo that moment. Whereas in real life, I snapped at my husband this morning. I don't like that about myself, or I would like to change. I would like to work on that behavior, that pattern, what brought that about. Like I can't take back that moment. And sometimes there's serious consequences to that, right? Like we know, like relationships end, jobs fall apart, like all sorts of things because of our behavior. And we can't take those things back. But we can take that experience and put it through the process of yoga to hopefully redirect the outcome
the next time.
in other
Yeah. Well,
situations.
and it makes me think about when you say, like, you use that as an example. And, I think one thing that yoga teaches us, and art making,
Hmm.
or creativity in any of its forms teaches us, is like, yes, when something, you know, goes off track, or, the track we've pointed ourselves on, whether it's the yoga or however you want to label it, you know, you could think about like that snapping at your husband, and then kind of now you go into a whole like, oh my God, I'm terrible, or why did I do that, or blah, 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 blah. But I think the way that yoga teaches us is like, okay, that happened. There'll be consequences. That's real. You take responsibility. That's also part of your role. And it's not, therefore it's not a mistake. It's there because it's showing you something, right?
Yes.
It's showing you a pattern, a reactivity to something.
Hmm.
That's all part of the self-knowledge that
Hmm.
yoga offers, and
Yeah.
I think creativity offers.
Well,
you
right,
know
because the mark or the word that goes awry, or the,
yeah.
all of those things that you say, okay, well, gosh, I wrote this entire chapter with this one idea, but when I go back and I read it with these other three chapters, like, it
Yeah.
doesn't work. It's a great, and sometimes they're great ideas. Like, how many great ideas are on the cutting room floor? The biggest film project I did it's a doc short with, it's about actually the artist that I traveled with, called From Australia with Love. LOV3 is how that is spelled. So, um, From Australia with Love, LOV3. I think it's on Vimeo still, but man, the cinematographer Dan Gibb and the director, it was a very small team on this project. So we all wore multiple hats, but that guy can shoot the most beautiful imagery. I mean, he's incredible. Um, but our original cut of the film, I think, was 38 minutes long. Maybe something around that. And actually, through my yoga teaching, I was very fortunate that a yoga student of mine, Daniel Young, who won the Oscar for documentary short making in 2011. He was my yoga student, and I was like, I'm kind of doing this weird film thing. Like, I don't know, maybe you could talk to me. And he came on and as a producer, and in working with him, uh, the final cut, I think, is 7 minutes and 8 seconds.
Mm.
And I can't tell you how the beautiful things, like the amount of edits we went through every time it went, like every time we went around and around, and it was like, nope, not working, nope, not working. And every single person, this is why I think, teams are critical, or peers or something like that, because every single one of us wanted to call the final product at one point, and somebody always held out, right? Like, whatever version it
Yeah.
was, somebody always held out and said, nope, let's do it again, let's try this, let's do this. And again, like, the beauty that was left on the cutting room floor
Mm.
is so
Mm.
much,
Mm.
and the
Mm.
final product
Mm.
is so stunning. Like, you don't know it's missing. And that film went on. We were selected for the Aspen Shorts Fest, which, if you are at all familiar with film, it's a huge deal. It was the first film we had made, and out of 3,100, we were one of the 70 selected for competition. We, I think, had a 8 film festival run with it. I mean, it was just an amazing experience. But it took, I mean, the amount of tears, these things aren't necessarily just like in yoga, the amount of tears.
Yes.
Like, I know this idea that, like, you're going to join yoga and it's going to be like, oh, look at this, like, peaceful way that I'm becoming, like, this, just like totally chill person. It's like, oh no, like, you're in the trenches, and in these
Yeah.
states,
Yeah.
you're in the
And
trenches with all of these things.
that discernment, I mean, when you're describing it, of like, yes, I totally, like, of course, can relate as an artist, but also as a yoga teacher. One of the things I love about many yoga practices is like the elegant simplicity. They're like the haiku of
Mm-hmm.
practices. There's nothing extra added, and it sometimes it's brutal.
Yes.
Take that out, take
Mhm.
that out, because it's all every single thing is pointing towards the intention,
Yes.
and it's so beautiful and it's brutal.
Yeah, I think the biggest red flag or warning light in things is when things start to feel really easy.
Yeah,
Because at that point, like, you're not, and truly, like, it doesn't have to be torturous, but you don't get, you don't evolve. I don't want to put any sort of qualifiers of whether that's a better you or a better product, but it doesn't evolve in stasis. And stasis is really comfortable.
yeah,
Stasis is so easy. I mean, we all had periods of our life that it's just like, God, I've woke up and I've done the same thing every day and like nothing's moving. And it's really easy to do. It's so easy to like
we
wake
live.
up and just do the thing over and over, or to, if you are a
Yeah,
creative, if it's like, God, I'm really good at this one thing. And and again, here in Santa Fe, it's like there's artists, and there are artists making money, not like little amounts of money, but money, painting the same painting over and over and selling it to different people for $10,000. And
yeah,
they call it, like, I don't know, I'm not going to judge that, but it's like, where's the growth? Like, where, like, that's so easy for you to make this gorgeous painting. So
yeah,
what's the next thing? And it's rampant here. This is one of the largest art markets in the world. And the
yeah,
number of artists that, like, and when you live in it, that's when you really see it. Cause it's like, oh, I'm seeing this artist at this art fair again, or, oh my gosh, this artist has another show. And I really want to go see it. And it's like, wow, sometimes it's variations on a theme. Sometimes it is the same painting. And I don't knock anyone making money. Like, I want to be very clear on that, whether you're a yoga teacher or an artist, like, especially in these fields,
yeah,
if you figured out a way and you're happy, like, I don't knock that. But I
right,
do hope for you that there's something that you're doing that, like, fulfills that other side.
yeah.
Because
You
again, it is very easy to make things beautiful and palatable,
you
even
know,
yourself.
exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's funny. Yesterday, I, I, on very short notice, substitute taught one of Amanda Green's asana
Mm-hmm.
classes, which happens on the Yoga Well platform.
Mm-hmm.
Just with like, I don't know, barely more than an hour's notice. It was like, by any chance, are you? I was like, okay, and and it's gentle. It's her gentle
Mm-hmm.
class. And so she sent me the practices at the end of the month. So this was going to be like the wrap up of the month. There's a theme for the
Mm-hmm.
month. So she sent me the previous 3 practices, and I was so struck of like, oh, gentle, or you might say simple, doesn't mean easy. Like what was going on in that class, I was like, oh, oh, okay, we're
Mm-hmm.
going here? Really? All right,
Mm-hmm.
let's do it. I'm down for it. But yeah, it was a moment. And I was like, oh, yeah. And, just to also again reference Hojin Sensei, she does something that I've done in yoga and creativity, which is drawing the breath. So you just make a mark on a page, usually with both hands, pencil or pens, or doesn't matter, on and
Mm-hmm.
just draw the inhale, draw the inhale, draw the exhale, make a mark. Don't even call it a drawing, just call it, make a mark on the page, and then just follow your breath on the page, you know and it's so simple. But to your earlier point too, there've been times in my life where I've had a creative block. I mean, I was just talking to someone, like, when I was going through perimenopause, I'm going to say it lasted for years.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to even admit it to myself. I kept telling people, I'm on the cusp. I know
Mm-hmm.
it's going to come. And then it was like,
Right.
4 years
Right,
later.
because that's identity too, right? You're the artist. You're the, like, if you're not, do, like, how do you separate, like, hey, this isn't, the thing that defines me in your eyes isn't happening for me right now.
Cute.
So therefore that identity is like saying, but I'm still an artist. Still me.
But you know what was one of the best things was like, all I have to do is sit there and make a mark with my breath. It does not need to be more than that. I mean, I'm sort of getting chills just remembering it, actually, because what a teaching, you know? And I think in the Vini Yoga world, it's like, yeah, you can do headstands and arm balances and complicated choreography on the mat, or you can actually be tuned into your breath and your experience and like lift your arm and genuinely be curious about what's happening and then exhale and bring it down. And the whole thing is in that. The whole thing is in that. There's nothing left out in that experience, actually.
Yeah, my yoga, where I don't want to go too deep into the details of it. I mean, the story's out there. There's no secrets or anything. But I come from a very corporate yoga background, and I also, I had a massive impact on the yoga community I came from. But there's not a single picture of me in a yoga posture on the internet. And but I had more individual students. I think it was something it was brought up at the time that it was a corporate studio with multiple locations, but in the time that this was brought up, I'd had something like 135,000 individuals take my yoga class. And
Wow.
Let me tell you, from that perspective, like the people who could do, like, on the whole, this is a generalization, but like by and large, the thing that I noticed is the people that did the most yoga and the most complicated postures were the biggest assholes. Like,
I've heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, like, no judgment or anything, but it would be like, like, I mean, I would be going to the studio, and I had some very popular classes, and we would open up early, and people would be rushing to get in to get their spot, and I would be at a stoplight driving to open the studio, and I had students, the best students, the strongest students, the ones with all the beads and the, like, karma is my, friend sort of t-shirts or whatever. And they would, I'm not kidding you, they would drive around me and flip me off because they didn't realize it was me, because I drive a stick. I drove a 2006 Jeep Wrangler, and the gear, I've had it for 13 years, but the gear would stick. And like one time this happened, the gear stuck. I didn't go right when the light turned green. And the student who was always next to me, the mat next to me, whirled around, flipping me off and honking. And the look on their face when they saw it was me, it was just like, but one of the classes that was actually to that point as well, that was one of the most popular. And I took this from a teacher way back when I started practicing, but we built towards a 4-minute hold of downward facing dog. And you talk about simple, like all of those people who kick up into handstand and all this other stuff, they actually hadn't built shoulder girdle strength. They actually hadn't, we take for granted that the foundation is always the strongest thing. And that's in your creative practice. That's in all, whatever that is, whatever the foundational space is. Like, yeah, it's really cool. It's actually really easy to do a huge mural. I mean, people don't understand that, but to blow something up really big and to chart it out in grids and to use projectors and all of that stuff, like, it doesn't take a lot. They look big. They look fascinating. You're like, oh my gosh, that's a huge accomplishment. And it's like, well, it really, I mean, I had an art teacher that was like, the hardest thing to do is go small and to capture those details in like a small space, or to evoke something so simply. I kind of lost the thread there, but the idea being that, like, we get so caught up again in the end product, when just like your house, if that foundation isn't good, I mean, how many people have tried to buy a house and found out the foundation's cracked?
Right.
And it's no good.
Right.
It's just, it's got to start in that simple space. And it's like the pursuit is the point. The pursuit, the process.
Yeah.
But the end result,
we don't know what it will be. And
No.
yeah, and of course, maybe the people doing handstands today are the people with the bum shoulder in 10 years. We don't know. Someone,
Oh, I
you know,
strongly recommend, especially, and this isn't just yoga, this is fitness trends in general, from CrossFit to, I mean, whatever the trending thing is. I tell people all the time with young kids, like, get them to be like the O word in medicine, osteo, whatever it is, the shoulder, knee, and hip, and because we are destroying our bodies. Like our American culture of like faster, harder, stronger,
yeah,
and crazier are it's just like, yeah, osteo. I can't think of the word, whatever. But whatever the doctor is that replaces your joints, like your
we're
kids should do that, because they will never be out of work,
right,
because we're all going
right.
to age in 25 years when they're graduating. We're going to
Yeah,
need them.
yeah, yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
even, anyway, to circle it back to like creative process, there's also, you know, like you were describing, to put the pressure on ourselves to always be producing something at some kind of masterful level, or the great novel, or my best work ever. I always have to be outdoing. It's like that also is unsustainable,
Mm-hmm.
And I think about, the evolution of an artistic practice or creative practice really is just like in the yoga practice, is really, we talk about this word shraddha, and Krishnamacharya, who you mentioned at the beginning, is sort of our great grandfather, yogic great grandfather, said a mature practice is a practice of shraddha. And shraddha being like faith in the process, the courage of your convictions. That's one definition I've heard, which I like, and in this idea that actually takes results out of it in a certain way. Like you can
Mm-hmm.
remember, like one of the definitions or the of the process is remembering, like, oh, right, like, oh, that time I yelled at my husband and then I apologized and we had a conversation and it actually turned out like better. That's cultivating shraddha in your relationship, in the strength of your relationship. And the time when I did a whole project and I got a big grant to do it, and the outcome was the pits, actually, one of the
Mm-hmm.
worst. This comes out of my history of like, whoa, that was not a great project in the end. It didn't ever come together, even though I got the big grant and I did a
Mm-hmm.
whole bunch of work.
Mm-hmm.
Even to this day, still feels in my mind unfinished. But
Yeah.
it didn't mean I stopped being an artist. It was like, okay, all right, noted. Like as I move forward, what was it that got in the way of that project?
Mm-hmm.
Actually resulting in something.
Right.
You know, so yeah, I think it's sort of endlessly fascinating. And when we take the pressure off ourselves and just like you said, creativity looks like cooking dinner and getting bold with your ingredients, or the truth is we're creating all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Getting up and doing the same thing that you do every day is still creating something. The question is it creating what you
What you
hope to
want.
be creating?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, it almost starts to get super meta, right? And that, like, it's like, no, like, you create this experience every day, and then you have to say, does the experience serve you? And like, what is, I'm really comfortably sitting in a space of, we live in a 200-year-old adobe here in northern New Mexico, and it's a lot of work we have to do. And my biggest art project is this home. Oh, hello.
And all your animals.
And yeah, we have a small little animal rescue here as well, and so there's always a friendly beast poking their head in. But yeah, it's like, hey, if I shift into looking at like I mean, my life is my biggest art project.
Yeah.
It really, I mean, like, and so that's going to be my home as we do the work that needs to be done. That's going to be my marriage. That's going to be my job. Like, it's going to be all of those things, because at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, you know, in another note, like, you know, okay, I live in this massive art. You know, there's a lot of art. You mentioned, you know, lots of artists have lived here for various reasons, and that's very evident in the thrift stores and the estate sales. Because at the end of the day, you're gone, and you know, all that stuff you're leaving behind that you think represents you as an artist, it might not mean anything to anyone.
I
And that's
mean,
like a weird cold truth, right? Like, hey, you can't do it for that reason.
mm-mm,
You can't,
mm-mm.
because you get this life, and like you can live it in a way. I mean, I think that in part, you know, I'm going to say something real controversial here, but I don't think Georgia O'Keeffe is that good of an artist. Like, if you, I mean, the, you know, I don't want that to be a like definitive statement, but technically, she's not that like, she's not that technical in a lot of ways. Like the what she paints doesn't push the boundaries of technical um creativity in that way. Like, she's not using any
Right.
materials that are strange, you know, like, but it was what she recorded of her life and how she lived it. And I think even the same thing, I think Frida Kahlo is more technically accomplished as a painter than Georgia O'Keeffe, but most people don't know Frida Kahlo for her art. They're obsessed with her life.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like they're really into the life she led. And I'm not saying people don't, but if you look, people don't
Yeah.
get Frida Kahlo paintings tattooed on them. They get Frida Kahlo's eyebrows tattooed on them.
Yeah.
Like, they're enamored with
Right.
her life. And Georgia O'Keeffe is the same thing. Like, we've done her home and studio tour here, and it is actually quite like, you walk out of there not so much because of the art. In fact, there's a in her home, you know, many of her paintings are just of the road she saw outside her window,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? In various stages of broken down and seasons and things like that. But it's not that like, it's, you know, if you just take that, you talk about simple, like, some of
Yeah.
her most favorite paintings are of how the road curves outside this one particular window. You know, in her winter house, there's a bomb shelter. It faces Los Alamos. And everyone around there had bomb shelters when all that was going on. She has a bomb shelter, and she specifically, unlike everyone else, directed it be built so that the door faced Los Alamos itself, so that if the worst happened and an accident happened and Los Alamos blew up and everyone had to live in their bomb shelters, she could open the door and paint the destruction.
Wow. I never
Yeah,
heard that
like, it
story.
really, but like, that was it. That was her way. She devoted her art practice, and the same Frida Kahlo did the same thing to to documenting their life as they saw it and
Yeah.
experienced it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just a different way of thinking. It's like, this is what you leave behind, right? Like, this is what it's your
Yeah.
story as much
Yeah.
as anything.
And it just strikes me that it's like a very unheroic way of, we tend to put artists, we love to have like that sort of single tortured artist in their studio, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a way of sort of, like you said, compartmentalizing and putting it over there, and then they're making their sort of masterpiece. And what you're talking about with Frida Kahlo and George O'Keeffe and others, it's like it's actually the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually living amongst people, like you say. And I have a friend who's an artist, and she says there's no such thing as a solo exhibition,
Mm-hmm.
because anything that's happening is so many people involved. And even though when it comes to being on your mat or your cushion or sitting at your desk or whatever, like, it is just you, but like, you're not alone. You're not doing this on your own, and you're not doing your yoga practice in some heroic way, welcome to enlightenment population one.
That's exactly it. That's another area that they crossroads, right? Because once again, there is something to like living in a creative state, bringing others into that state to drive you forward, to push you further, to give you the feedback, to just create a response loop that is the same with yoga, right? Like I think Chase actually says this all the time. I think it's Chase, but like there is no, like, you're not actually a good yogi if you're sitting in a mountain, like isolated from the world. Like your yoga doesn't happen. Like your yoga happens in the moment. You snap at your husband in the kitchen in the morning, and it becomes a fight that maybe this didn't happen this morning, but it has happened. And it becomes that fight that you're looking at each other going, are we done?
Mm-hmm.
Are we over? Like it happens in the like, hey, I go to this job every day and I make $350,000 and I'm so miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've
Mm-hmm.
got to figure something else out. And there's this opportunity to do everything I love and make $45,000 a year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of yoga that goes into figuring out what you're going to do there, right? And there's a lot of yoga going into, I mean, I certainly don't advocate that people keep unhealthy people in their lives and people that are harmful or toxic or abusive or any of those things, but challenging people, like like there's a lot of reasons that, I could just pretty much be like, you know what, I need to talk to my family.
Well, family.
I love them. But like there's a lot of challenge there. And yoga is in those challenging relationships.
There's that idea of the friction of tapas,
Mm-hmm.
the Sanskrit word
Yes.
tapas, and it comes in our lives aplenty.
Mm-hmm.
It can come in a asana practice, sure, and it comes in our creative life, absolutely.
Right,
like
because if it's not being seen, if it's not being like, there's a artist here who does a lot of work with tea bags, and I happen to be on Canyon Road, and I know the gallery she shows at, they're friends and these things, and I happen to be on Canyon Road, which is the big gallery street in Santa Fe, and I was in another little like wine bar area sitting down, and a family came in, and they were all kind of meeting back up, right? They'd all kind of walked up and down Canyon Road and seen different things, and were reporting back to each other. And this guy, typical, just sort of like vacationer in Santa Fe, met up with his family, and they're like, what'd you see? And he's like, I don't know. I walked into a place and I saw a thing on the wall that was just a bunch of used tea bags for $4,000. And I thought, I am not where I need to be. Knowing of that artist, like she's friends with other friends of ours, and it was just like, but like, that's actually beautiful because it didn't hit him, like you've got to have those, like, you need all of it.
Yeah.
For your art to really resonate, you need the people that just don't get it. I mean, people, and this is something that it's like, hey, everyone, Jackson Pollock is sort of the quintessential example of this, that, oh, people see a Pollock painting and I'm like, I'm going to do that. Could you? It's all context. Because at the time, that blew people's minds. And like, and there is a subtle art to making it like, no, paint splatters themselves don't go together. He had a different way of like doing this. And he's got people over here going, I don't know, I could do this. And that's fine. Those weren't his people. His contemporaries were Clifford Still, like, and they were all having a conversation.
Right. Yeah. And yes.
Yeah. But like, it's that conversation just again. And so you have in your working, in your life, you have relationships, and they're not just about having the relationships. They're about, you learn about yourself through these avenues. And, if you want help with that, you've got a yoga therapist, at least in this lineage. That's how we look at it. And if you want to be like that external space, those beyond you are just so, and that's what, going back, like, let's circle it back even to yoga and creativity. So here we have, this class And a lot of people are like, what is it? And, we had a student in the last one that like kind of came in going, so are you going to teach me how to paint? Are you going to, like, she's an engineer, very like, had
Right.
this
Her
brain
first
that was like
question was about
very technical.
color theory. She asked me about color
Yes.
theory. And I
Yeah.
was
Okay.
like,
That's what it was. Yeah. Color theory.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And yeah, no, that's not at all what we're doing. So maybe let's talk
yeah,
about what we do.
yeah. A wonderful meandering way to get
Mm-hmm.
here. But yeah, so everything we just talked about, you know, yeah, so the class, it I like to think it's for everyone because it could be someone who's like this person, really is an engineer and has, in her own words, a very linear way of thinking. And so, how beautiful that she stepped up into this thing she didn't know what it was going to be, to connect with something that felt quite outside of her comfort zone. And people have been there like you who have a creative life, but maybe it's been on hold or somehow not been central, and it's like a reconnecting. And there's been artists who have an active studio life who are just curious, like, about like, what does yoga have to do with this,
Yeah,
and
some of them super successful musicians have been in that class. And I
yep,
mean, I do want to credit like some of the stuff that I'm talking about are connections I made through this class. Like, hey, I mean, like looking around being like, I don't have a typical like my whole life story is this super creative meandering thing that's actually very interesting. Like my home is very interesting. Like
yeah,
what I'm putting out creative process all the time, even if I don't know it. I might not be intentionally in that state and I need some help there. But I mean, your class really helped, and the way you built it around yogic concepts and different exercises. I mean, we do writing exercises, we do
hmm.
exercises where we make a mark using our preferred tool. We do, there's
Yeah,
all sorts of different I think part of it is there is no medium in a creative process. Like that is an identity. If you consider yourself a painter, if you consider yourself a this, if you consider
yeah,
yourself a that, like that is an identity. And it's okay. It might be where you're most comfortable. It might be where you thrive the most. But
yeah,
again,
and sometimes that's right where you get stuck, right?
mm-hmm,
So we always start with a practice, right? So by practice, what I mean is, sometimes I'm like, maybe it should be called yoga and meditation, or creativity, or and meditation, because
mm-hmm,
when people hear the word yoga, I know people who have not taken the class because they're like, I don't want to do chaturanga or whatever, and I'm like,
right?
it's not that. So it's not, we're not doing usually yet to ever have us do a sun salutation, I think. So it
No.
really is. So the practice, what do I mean by that, is like there's intentional movement connected to breath. Sometimes we use a chanted mantra. So there's sound sometimes. There's usually some kind of directed visualization connection. Um, and it's that the practice is about 20-25 minutes long
Mm-hmm,
in the class. So that really is just to settle us in our bodies. Like you said, it's a state. So we all come in from whatever we've been doing all day long, and we're not actually ready to connect to our creative self. So we just want to settle in our body. And how do you do that? Well, you do some moving and breathing, and then the chanting, or if we do chanting or whatever. And then the idea also is it's a preparation, it's getting our whole system ready for the topic of the class. And so far I've been using the Yoga Sutra as kind of the guide. So picking out ideas from Yoga Sutra. I'm thinking actually for the fall, I want to venture a little outside of the Yoga Sutra
oh,
and
fun. Fun.
And we still will touch in with that, of course, but to focus on some other aspects within yoga that we work with in sort of just opening it up maybe more broadly. But in the past we've like focused on, say, like, well, the last time we focused on the klesha. So the klesha are the 5 ways, according to the Yoga Sutra, the 5 ways that we cause ourselves suffering. And as per usual, I like go into the like like, let's dive right into it. Let's go right into our suffering. That's just sort of my way. um and so the practice would kind of be that introduction. Then I would introduce the topic, give some background, whether it's from Yoga Sutra or whatever. Often I'll show examples of artists who I think are taking up that topic in a particular way. So that might include visual art. It often include poetry. Um, so that would just give people a chance to be like, okay, I hear like the topic. What does this have to do with art making or creative work? And it's like, well, here, let's take a look at some examples. And then we would have time. In the beginning, I give more directed prompts so that people can have some experiences using drawing, using writing, using whatever, in case they haven't done that in a long, long time. So a little more directed in the beginning. And then as the class goes on, people start to, well, see what they like, see what they don't like, what attracts them, what they're less. And then they start to choose what medium they want to use with the prompt. But there's always a prompt, and it's based in this idea. So if it's okay with you, what happened last time when we were doing the klesha is this is something actually, again, I got from Hojin Sensei, which is I would often read a poem, and then from that poem there'd be a line, say, which would become a writing prompt for the whole group, and we would write together a group poem. So everyone would write their response to the line in the chat, in the Zoom room chat, and then we'd assemble them, and that would be our group poem for that class. So with your permission, I would love to read one, because it's, I mean, they broke my heart every week. I know I said in the class you were in was like, if we're not crying, are we really doing yoga and creativity? It was really, people just are incredible.
Well, and I want to say too, one of my favorite parts of the class for some of the students that we had come in, they're like, I don't know, I'm not really creative. And like, there were, I mean, the things that they did, because that's another huge component, again, in this group setting, like, we're discussing what came up for us. We're talking about it. We're sharing with each other, like, hey, what you shared really evoked for me this sort of thing. And so there's a discussion component. The class, we keep going back and forth. Like, I feel like we could make it as long as like, I almost want to say it starts at this time and who knows when it's going to end. Like, just commit. But I think we the classes are each an hour and a half long.
Yeah.
And we very intentionally, I think the first time you did it, they were an hour, weren't they? And then we were like, we need to tack on that half
that didn't
hour.
Work.
yeah. It was like, because there's so much here. And but there's so like you say, there's the practice, the yoga practice, whether that be breath, meditation, chanting, and then there's the creative practice in whatever form that takes. And then there's a group discussion component, which is critical. Like, that isn't like intentional. So that you're getting this sort of feedback, so that you're able to process. Because there's something in what I think too, in you, when you discuss your own work, it's way different than just putting it on the page and slapping it up on a wall and being in the coffee shop and saying, hey, this is $200.
Yeah, in hearing other people's, how they took in the prompt, or and then, or if they struggled to understand. I mean, I think it's, everyone is benefiting. when people are sharing their experience. And
the musicians that are having to draw things for the first time, and the writers that are, like, and
yeah,
vice versa, the visual artists that are like, I never write anything, and it's so great.
yeah, it really is so
Kind of
great.
going
Yeah,
back to that, like, do things that you don't feel comfortable, like, it's not that you're bad at, but that you're not comfortable in. Like, again, this that is where you grow, right? Being able to put a line down on your iPad and not liking the shape and just undoing it and getting the line you want. There's always a time when, like, that's great, but if you're not doing the stuff behind that, like, forces you to think, like, hey, what do I do now
yeah.
that this
I
has
always,
happened?
I always think we're like our most alive in those moments when it's
Yeah,
actually going
the
very well.
problem solving. It's a skill of I mean, it's literally problem solving. And most finished visual artworks or written artworks or any of those things, like, you do a lot of performance art, and that's a whole different field, but the thing that gives you a finished product, like, that is just ideally you're looking at a bunch of problems solved.
And just to say, I'm not doing performance art for very long. Like, it is so beyond what I ever imagined myself doing. And
Yeah.
it really credit my yoga practice, my Zen practice also, of like giving me the courage to step into this thing that I'm like, what am I doing?
Well, and
Okay.
that's live performing. That's live problem solving. Most theater, you see a theater performance, and to you it goes off flawlessly. You
Yeah,
talk to that cast, and you're like, "Oh my god, my mark came off the stage, and I didn't know
right.
where I had to be." Like, you're seeing a concert of problem solving. I mean,
Yeah,
That's what live. That's what's so beautiful about live, right? Is like, and
yeah,
even going back to film, like a documentary film or all of any of those things, like, it looks so well put together, but when you're shooting a documentary, like, you don't know what you're gonna get. Like, you're telling a story with what's being given
right,
to you. Like, you might say,
right.
hey, I want to tell the story of this artist who lived in New Mexico, and, like, that's about all you know that you're doing, because it might actually turn out that it was the housekeeper
Right.
who was that person's great, like, you have to show up for
Yeah,
what's going to show up for you. Like, if you go into a lot of things with an idea of an outcome, just like a relationship, if
yeah,
you start
that's
dating someone and you're like, I'm going to marry this person, and you haven't even talked to him about that, or if you're like, I don't know if I actually, the opposite is usually true. People go into relationships and they say, I don't think I can marry you because you're not XYZ
yeah.
and this other laundry list of things that I've envisioned. And it's like, God, you just lost the best person for you.
And that is Mr. Desikachar. His definition, one of his definitions of avidya, so avidya being the first of the five klesha, and it means, a misperception, incorrect understanding, is his definition that I really love and appreciate is just whenever we're saying, I know. And that is like, yeah, to come into some creative work, whether it's making a mark with your inhale or creating a documentary film, and keeping that, I don't know, I don't know, that's where we stay alive. That's actually living. I know is so dead. It's deadening. Yeah. So, so we did, over the course of 8 weeks, we did the five klesha, and this came out of the last class, which I wanted to end maybe on a more upbeat note after we had really dug into suffering. Um, so we did this idea of pranidhana. So pranidhana comes up in several places in the Yoga Sutra, and then when you break it apart, one of my favorite definitions of it is to be held completely continuously. So, like, what is possible in our life, in our creative work, if we're held? We actually feel uh, held completely continuously. But I've also seen it defined as vow. So that's actually what we took up in the class was what is our vow? And I started with a poem that was written, I'm just calling it up here. So It's a poem from a Chinese 8th century Chinese monk named Shidao. And it's called The Song of the Grass Roofed Hermitage. So I'm going to read Shidao's poem, and then I'll read the poem that we created as a group poem in the class. So The Song of the Grass Roofed Hermitage. Turn around the light. This is a translation, of course. Turn around the light to shine within, then just return. The vast inconceivable source can't be faced or turned away from. Meet the ancestral teachers. Be familiar with their instruction. Bind grasses to build a hut, and don't give up. Let go of hundreds of years and relax completely. Open your hands and walk, innocent. Thousands of words, myriad interpretations, are only to free you from obstructions. If you want to know the undying person in the hut, don't separate from this skin bag here and now. So, our group poem, which we titled Vow, took up the line, letting go of hundreds of years, comma, I open my hands and fill in the blank. So each person in the class wrote what they would fill in the blank. And collectively, we made our poem. So, vow. Letting go of hundreds of years, I open my hands and catch the raindrops. Letting go of hundreds of years, I open my hands and birds fly. Letting go of hundreds of years, I open my hands and allow myself to live openly. Letting go of hundreds of years, I open my hands and fully, finally. Letting go of hundreds of years, I open my hands and breathe in the infinite freedom of letting go of hundreds of years. I open my hands and that was always there. Letting go of hundreds of years, I open my hands and free the bubbles. Letting go of hundreds of years, I open my hands and reach out to embrace what's in front of me. Letting go of hundreds of years, I open my hands and receive.
I mean, that's what's so cool, right? I think people don't, one of the biggest misconceptions about yoga, creativity, all of this is that, like, if you just follow process, if you're just in pursuit, like, the outcome is noteworthy.
Trust.
Yeah, it's like, just letting that, I mean, and if, like, full disclosure, I was not in the third or in the last iteration. I was in the previous two, but so this is my first time hearing that poem, and we didn't do that in the iterations I was in. And that's also, like, in this yogic and creative way, like, the class is evolving. Like in Vini Yoga, I think it was Desikachar, I think, studied the Yoga Sutras 7 times, right? He went all the way through over years and did it again. I think he studied him 7 times with his father, Krishnamacharya,
Yeah.
if I'm correct. And that's another hurdle we have a lot with people when they come into our world. It's like, yeah, no, you just kind of start. Like, we have these yoga philosophy discussions, we have all of this, and, like, there is no beginning or end point. Like, right now, the Yoga Sutras discussion is, I think, in chapter 3. We have a sacred text discussion, which is currently in the Bhagavad Gita, but it's really kind of more like, I mean, we don't use this language in our public marketing, but it's like Bible study. Like, if you're looking at going to church, you don't just you don't say, hey guys, I want to start with chapter 1 verse 1. Like, it's
Right,
like, no, you're
know.
starting
Yeah.
we're all the way into, like, the New Testament at this point, so you
Yeah.
jump in, and these things that come from oral traditions, especially, like, that's how they're supposed to be. Like, if you were learning this back in the time when most people didn't read, like, they would show up for the teacher and the teacher would teach, and each one, while they can be linear, stands on their own. But the idea being that you study these things over and over. Like, you don't just do the Yoga Sutras and then you go on to the next thing. And like the Yoga Sutras remain 25 years in your past. And it's the same thing. And like, and in this way, you see it evolving. Like, you're evolving this class based on your
Yes.
experience, because in Vini Yoga, you start to teach to deepen your studentship, which is not
Yes.
the way we really frame it here in the West. But like, you are growing, you are doing the class over and over. And, at the Yoga Well Institute, we encourage this. And so when, if it, for instance, with yoga and creativity, the first time you do it, it's a full price class. Like, that's the way we do tuition waivers, and we really do work with people to get people in. So I try to mention that all the time, that if you are serious about studentship, there is no barrier that we will not work with you to find the appropriate place so that
Yeah.
you can come in. But it is but just generally speaking, we also hold our value, and like, we price our offerings so at their value, and so that you, the teacher, can, again, I said earlier, I do not begrudge anyone for making money. And in fact, we all have to put food on the table. But that being said, it's a regular price class. But once you've done it, you get to do it again for half off every single time it comes around,
Yeah.
because every single time it's different.
Absolutely.
And if you really want to commit to this, and that's the same with our trainings, like even our big trainings, it's like, we actually encourage that you do our trainings are designed so that if you do our 300-hour Deepen Your Yoga program, and 6 years later are feeling stuck, you come back and do the Deepen Your Yoga program again, because it's
Yeah.
not the same.
It won't be the same, right?
It won't be the
Yeah.
same. It never will be the same. And
Right.
so I love the evolution. I'm excited for what you're thinking about doing for the next one. And it's at a time that I can join this time around. I think it's going to be Sunday mornings, right? Starting October. Well, Sunday, depending on what time zone you're in.
Yes.
I think Sunday, October 20th is the 8-week start. I think we are looking at 9 a.m. Pacific and
Yes.
noon Eastern. You'll see that it's not up on the Yoga Well website. Well, depending on when this goes out, just look at the Yoga Well
Yeah.
website, and
Yeah.
it may be up at that point
Yeah.
for enrollment. But no, I mean, I love that that's what came out, and that, a bunch of people that we just got to bear witness to a piece of art from a bunch of people
Yeah.
that probably
Yeah.
everyone listening to this doesn't know, or, maybe if you were a part of that, and you might not recognize, like, gosh, hearing it all these months later, like how
I
your little
mean,
piece, how they all go together.
it's so yeah, and also, because we didn't do it in every single class, but it did kind of, it was so rich every time. It was just always blew my mind how it would come together, and it's, by writing one line, you don't have to feel any of those feelings about, like, oh my god, I'm not a poet or whatever. Just like, write a couple words, okay? you know and so one thing which I have not done yet, but I promised and I will do, is create a zine for everybody in the class, so that they can have their collection of poems, the inspiration poems, and then the poems that we wrote together. So everyone will have their little book of poetry.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so cool, because then, you've definitely, as this progresses, and we're hoping this will be the second time this year.
Yeah.
I'd like to see it 3 times a year on our calendar. But it's quite a body of work that you're amassing with
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
And the other thing we have a discussion group, I should mention. It's this platform River. But we every new cohort we add to the same discussion group, which you'll always be a part of, whether you're part of the active class or not, and people will post their work. And it's another way that, like, you might not be in the class, but you'll be getting the notifications of some of the discussion that's happening, and you're welcome to join. And it can also just be that, like, little push, like, you get this notification saying, hey, I did this. And going out, this is a little bit the artist way, right? That you you do all these exercises in keeping with I mean, the theme is so constant. I'm actually reading a book now, and I can't remember the title, but it's a part of a 4-book series, with the first book being My Beautiful Friend by an Italian
Oh,
author. Yeah,
the Neapolitan Diaries.
the Neapolitan Diaries. And the second book, and there's a very studious girl character in this book, and I was just reading last night. I mean, the universe conspires in different ways, but a section where she said she really decided to devote herself to studying, in which everything was studying. So when she sat down to lunch, she studied how she made her sandwich. She studied, like, and it's just, this is the same thing that we're talking about. If you set that intention,
Yeah.
that the intention is moving into being, in yoga, we would say it's like cultivating balance, right? Balance in your life. Like, you set the intention for yoga to permeate everything. So that, and like you say, you might not know it's working. It might not be a conscious thing, but like, the example we kind of talked about earlier was like, hey, I didn't snap at my husband. I didn't say that snarky thing this morning. That was on the tip of my tongue. But hey, something actually unconsciously came in and said, just
Yeah.
maybe not this, maybe you don't need to get this barb in today, and it's like, hey, in the same way that, like, oh, I feel inspired to do something different I'm going to take a different drive home from work today.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just got called to take the scenic route and add 10 minutes, but fall foliage, it's working constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I will also say one thing that I've started to be more intentional in my own way with the class, because it is an evolution for me as well. And like, I feel very much the student in the class also. But something I did last time, which I feel I feel like is correct, is to see the full 8 weeks as like a container, and just like in our there's like we have in Vini Yoga like steps of meditation where you like you enter in a particular way and then you end in a particular way. There's like you really create this container of experience. And so I really started to think about the 8 weeks as like we enter in that first week and we have our invocation and we sort of set the intention. This is what we're doing together. And then at the end, there's like a closing of that, so that it's a complete thing. And yeah.
Well, and that's what's so beautiful. Like, I mean, the beauty of Vini Yoga, because that what you're doing is so Vini Yoga, right? Like, because any one of those 8 individual classes can be done on their own.
Sure.
They do not need the ones prior or the ones after to be completed and to have a full experience. And in fact, our meditation courses on our platform are like this. And they're, you are often a teacher of our 15-minute breathing and meditation course. And it's like, hey, every month there's a start to this sort of idea, this concept, this intention, and you go through 4 weeks. And if you do those meditations, there's this experience that is sort of intended. And that's very much a Vini Yoga thing. We do have, while we do we emphasize the personal relationship, there is the opportunity for a little bit of group, right? Like but it's very specifically intended. And so by the end of the month of meditation, whether you're in Chase's Yoga for Meditation class or 15-minute breathing and meditation, it's like, hey, here is this arch. But if you're busy this time and you really can only drop into the second week, you're going to get a full experience. Like, you do not have to, but that ties into, again, like the Yoga Sutras. Like, hey, if you only study 3 lines of the Yoga Sutra, you're going to get a lot out of that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, if you only ever hear 3 lines of the Yoga Sutra, just like people quote Bible verses or these sorts of things, like, I don't want to make too much of a tie in there because that can be problematic, but it helps to anchor it in something that a lot of us know and are familiar with, but like you're going to get a lot. And
Yeah.
if you go through the whole thing,
You'll get
sure,
more.
there's a benefit starting at the beginning and going to the end. But you know what? Your experience starts where you are at the,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that, the very first, it's the most, the entire Yoga Sutras is encompassed in that one word, in that first line.
Yep.
And it's the alchemist. You go all the way around, end up, you're standing on the treasure the whole time. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, it's so
Yeah.
great to see all the way these themes, and that's a body of work too, right? That's creativity. Like you can look at an artist's entire repertoire,
Right.
or you can just see the one painting, and it can be a
Yeah.
profound.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I
Yeah,
sort of anyway, we've been talking. It's been
yeah,
great. Thank you,
super
Jess,
great.
for
Thank you, Robyn. I look forward to it, and
yeah,
look, a continued collaboration in all these ways.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're hearing this and you're interested, it's the Yoga Well, yogawell.com. Just really short and sweet, where you'll be able to find yoga and creativity and any of these other classes. Because again, we will be offering this multiple times, and I know yoga. Robyn puts it out in her email too, so you can find it both. Again,
Yeah.
whichever avenue you enter in,
Yeah. And we'll put them in
come
the
join
I
us.
always put it links in the
Yeah,
description of YouTube. So they'll be
love that.
there. Yeah. Thanks, Jess.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.